Whatever you want.
All right. Thank you for your patience with me. It's fun to start through the little opening with the Sunday school kids, and they're learning Away in the Manger to sing for Christmas Eve. And today's the first time that we did verse 3. They haven't even had a chance to do it yet, and they picked up on it just like that. These kids are incredible. I think when I was that age, I was probably distracted by things and not paying attention. They're all right with it. Well, welcome again to our class on marriage and relationships, and we're only about 3 or 4 weeks behind where I thought we'd be at this point. So we certainly won't finish, but I think what I want to do is look at something today, focusing mostly on communication. Next week is the voters meeting, so there's no adult Sunday school next week. But the week after that was supposed to be an Ask the Pastor. We'll do that another time, but I think I'll use that week to do another final session on marriage and relationships. So if there's any aspects of marriage and relationships that you particularly wanted to see covered, but I haven't talked about, just mention it to me, and that's what we'll do. So divorce, raising children, getting remarried, who handles the finances in the family, all that kind of stuff. If there's anything in particular that interests you, just mention. I'll make sure that 2 weeks from now, that's what we'll talk about. For right now, let's start by looking at 1 Peter chapter 3. So I'll have you open up to 1 Peter chapter 3. I think while you're opening up, I'm going to pray. Lord, thank you for this chance to gather us together. Continue by your word to open and enlighten the eyes of our hearts, to see and to know truth and to live wisely and to experience the good fruit of this blessed thing that you have created, which makes us as human beings know and experience the same love that you have for us. Amen. 1 Peter chapter 3. And I'll start at verse 1. Take a look at this. There's a few things in here, but I am aiming toward something in particular toward the end. So likewise, wives, so these are directions from Peter for wives and husbands. Wives, be subject to your own husbands. Well, where have we seen that already before? That was in Ephesians, right? So we looked at what subject means, and that it's not the way the world understands it or looks at it. It's actually a great joy and a privilege, just as we are subject to Christ, to be able to delight and joy in someone that, by God's will, has been given a certain level of authority. So wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Now, he introduces us to something that is very interesting, and that is, what about the marriage where one's a Christian and one's not a Christian? That's a big topic, isn't it? Yeah. It's hard enough to live the way God wants us to live when husband and wife are both Christians. That's hard enough. When one is not a Christian and isn't open to what the Word of God says, now you're in quite a predicament. But here's the interesting thing that Peter has a take on it with, that if you have a husband who does not obey the Word, in other words, a husband that's either not a Christian or is a prodigal walking away from Christ, maybe they still believe, but they're not following that belief, they may be won to what?
To Christ.
One back to Christ, one back to biblical faith and living, without a word by the conduct of their wives. In other words, the strongest thing here that can help draw a man back into walking with the Lord is the conduct of the wife. So we've already looked at how women tend to be more, maybe we haven't looked at that. I probably mentioned it, but we're going to talk about it more today. That women tend to be more verbal. It's just a generalization, right? It's not always true, but it tends to be true. So when the wife sees a shortfall in the husband, or a blind spot in the husband, or something the husband is missing, how does the average wife deal with that? She tells him. And she tells him again. And she tells him again. And she tells him over and over again. And we've already seen that Adam, remember, because he listened to the voice of his wife in the Garden of Eden, then the curse came upon him. So what is in the soul of every man? It's not right, it shouldn't be there, but it's part of our Adamic nature. What is in there? This reluctance to listen to the voice of our wife. So the more the wife talks, the more the average husband does what? Yeah. Who was telling me? Oh, Paulie. I hope this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, your dad's in heaven, so I already know I'm forgiven for this.
Sure.
He was even telling me about how his dad, as he got older, was losing his hearing. And so he joked about how when his wife would get on his case about something, he just turned the other way so he couldn't read her lips.
Selective hearing.
Yeah, right, selective hearing. Well, here the secret is for the wives to win their husbands by their conduct. A great tape that I listened to many years ago. I got it from Focus on the Family. Was a woman, she was an Air Force officer's wife. So she got married to this guy in the Air Force, and she talks about how as their marriage went on, he was married to the Air Force. And so she was expected to be home and expected to be there for things the wife is supposed to take care of the house and whatever all else, but he was not a good or attentive husband in any way. And the more she talked to him about it and said, why can't we talk more? Why can't we discuss things together? The more that drove him away, drove him right into the arms of the Air Force. But she said when she became a Christian, and her husband was not yet a Christian, and she's looking at this, and they had a 5-year-old daughter. So you want a 5-year-old daughter, that's daddy's girl, right? So she starts to watch as the wife, how the husband would come home from a long, hard day, and the little girl would bring his slippers and go, "Hi, Daddy, here I brought these for you. Here, Daddy, I made a picture for you today." And the little girl was so attentive, and the husband responded to this little girl. I thought this was the greatest thing in the life. So this wise wife, she said, I'm going to stop nagging him and getting on his case and telling him what he's doing wrong, and I'm going to just start treating him like he's special and wonderful, right? And have a nice dinner for him and bring him his slippers and try to help him, instead of telling him how hard my day was, try to rub his shoulders and ask how hard his day was. Right? It seems, if you're a woman and you're in a tough relationship, this sounds impossible. But she did this. And what do you think happened? He became a Christian. They now go around, they're speakers at marriage conferences. So by this respectful and pure conduct, by treating him as though you highly regard him, you value him, those are the things that can turn a man's heart. Verse 3, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear. Some Christians take this to mean that women can't wear jewelry or they can't get their hair done. That's not what it's saying. What's it saying? That should not be the focus of your adorning, right? You're not more concerned about what you look like outwardly than you are about what you look like inwardly. Verse 4, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. So you see this theme here in what he's describing. The wife that is able to win her husband over is the one that's respectful and gentle and quiet and precious in God's sight. Verse 5, for this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good, and do not fear anything that is frightening. So to follow in the shoes of Sarah here. Now I should just make this note, because this was a benefit of being in the Navy. My first tour, I was on I was a non-voting member of the domestic violence, what was the name of our committee? The assessment committee or the awareness committee or something, I don't know. All the domestic violence cases came through our committee where we took a look at it from our various expertise areas and made recommendations to the command on what should be done. That was an eye-opener for me. I learned a lot about domestic violence, which happens unfortunately even in some Christian homes. So a woman who has been subject to domestic abuse, whether it's violence or verbal abuse or emotional abuse, it takes a lot of different forms. This goes right over her head. You can't hear this. You just, when you've been hurt and wounded like that, you cannot do what makes you vulnerable again. So that's a different situation. So if any of you, God forbid, experience this, or you know someone that's like this, it's a different kind of scenario. But for those that are able, having this gentle, quiet, respectful approach in marriage, that is the best thing to win a husband over who's not responsive. Telling him all the time, what does that do? It's like magnets with the same polarity, right? The closer you get, the further he gets. So there's good wisdom here. And in that last phrase, do not fear anything that is frightening. Why would he have to add that? Because what's the temptation of the devil on a woman who is seeking to be a godly woman? Oh, you're going to lose your influence. Oh, you're going to lose all your rights. Oh, you're going to be stomped all over on you. He's going to just take advantage of you again and again and again. And that might happen sometimes for a person to turn around. But that's what the devil tries to make you afraid of. There's a bumper sticker. I've seen it more than once. Somebody help me. I bet you've seen it. I can't remember exactly. Women who something rarely make history or something. What's it? Has anyone seen that? Am I the only one that's seen that? I can't remember. Women who are quiet, or women who don't make a fuss, rarely make history or something like that. Anyway, you could see the thrust of it, right? It's designed to get women standing up for themselves and getting out in the marketplace of ideas and being tough. It's completely contrary to the biblical picture of a godly woman who conquers and does things by prayer and by her character rather than by making a fuss and being loud. Where does that come from? That's this temptation of the devil, making people afraid that if I don't stand up for myself, I'm going to lose my position. So don't fear the things that the devil's trying to put in your mind. Verse 7, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. What does it mean in an understanding way? What is understanding? It's taking the time and the effort to comprehend and grasp, listen to, and discern what is her situation, what is her need, what is her interest, what is her want. That takes effort. And husbands should never assume, although we do all the time, we assume we know what our wives are like and what they want. That takes careful listening. Have I shared this before? That because God made women to be the helpmates, the perfect complementary parts, remember Adam and Eve? That women have a natural knowledge often of, an intuitive knowledge often of what it will take to strengthen a relationship. So if you as a husband wanted to have a closer relationship with your wife, if you were doing what we talked about last time we met, the husband loving his wife as Christ loved the church. So you're making up your mind you're going to have the best relationship with your wife. How would you find out what's needed to do that?
Talk to her.
Ask her.
Listen.
Ask her.
Asking and listening.
Ask her and listen, right. She knows. She knows what it's going to take. So a good and a wise husband will periodically go to his wife and say, honey, what can we do to have a better marriage? What do I need to do to be a better husband and make this a better marriage? That's a wise thing. And that's a husband living with his wife according to understanding, doing what Peter says, right? Showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. Now, in what ways is a woman weaker? Physically, right. So clearly, it's not that she's weaker intellectually. There's a great episode by with Everybody Loves Raymond. Remember the one where they take the IQ test? So funny. It's not that women are weaker intellectually. It's not that they're weaker in terms of character or in abilities or any of those things. It's that they are physically, on average, generalization here again, weaker. Women have a lower blood supply. They have lower bone density. There's all kinds of ways where. That's why all these transgender athletes are winning all the women's sports, right? Because they're different. So to show honor to your wife as the weaker vessel, and what does honor mean? Honor means placing a high sense of priority and value. What you honor is what you value highly. So you're placing a high value on your wife as the weaker vessel, meaning that you try to care for her and help her and support her. This verse comes to my mind all the time because there's lots of times where I'm sitting watching the TV and Dawn's up doing the dishes, and I'll say, she's fast with dishes. She flies through that stuff, and I plod, and it takes me a long time. It's not, and she values that I do other things in the marriage. I do the ironing and all this kind of stuff. But she usually does the dishes. But I to admit it, especially since she's not here, I feel guilty about it. So, she'll be doing the dishes and I'll be sitting there. I'll go, honey, you need any help? She'll say, no, I got it. Oh, good.
You're way too
But valuing her as the weaker vessel is that you jump in and you try to support her and help her and make her life easier, make her life better any way that you can. I may have used this illustration before, but I just remember it so much being in the store and the man and his wife that were walking along, and he took a big bag of dog food and he said, here honey, put this in the cart, and he tossed it to her and she caught it like that. And I could see, in his mind this was a joke, he thought it was funny, but in her mind she was struggling with it. And she was just being quiet, not saying anything, right? So you see how that attitude about the whole thing and the sense of value plays into this. Now look at this next phrase. Show honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life. And you see a little footnote? If you're using one of these Bibles, you see it? So let's go down to the bottom of the page and look at that footnote. Number 3. Someone read that.
Some manuscripts says you are joint heirs.
Right, so some Bible manuscripts there translate that or read that as joint heirs. So since you are joint heirs in the grace of life. So what does it mean to be a joint heir? Together. You receive it together, right. This is another thing. We could spend a whole lesson on this, the family covenant. What if a married person is Christian and their spouse is not Christian? Is their situation just like any other couple, or is there something different? Does God regard them differently? There's passages I read that show that God is making special promises to that married person, that you are joint heirs of the grace of life. So the husband is to be aware that this is something that has to be received together, and then so that your prayers may not be hindered. That's interesting. So the assumption there is that if you're not doing this, if you're not living with your wife according to understanding and treating her as a co-heir, what happens? Your prayers are hindered. Isn't that interesting? Isn't it kind of like, isn't every person kind of one-on-one with God in their prayers? It's my prayers and God, and it's kind of, that's how you and your prayers with God, that's how it works? Obviously not. that if there's something wrong in your relationship with your wife, your prayers are not going to be as effective or powerful as they would be otherwise. That should sweep into our souls a little bit. So you want to strengthen your prayer life and have a stronger prayer life. Build this kind of an understanding relationship with your wife. I worked with a woman years ago. Her husband that I never met, so this was all before I met her, but he was a pastor, not Lutheran, one of these non-denominational churches, and he would get up there on Sunday morning and do the non-denominational tap dance show, right? You'll know what I'm talking about? Great speaker, funny, charismatic, engaging, entertaining, fast-paced music, lots of lights shining, boom, 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 and everybody's coming to this church. They're flocking in, they're going home, they all feel great. He treated his wife like she was his slave. She said he never hit me, but one time when I disagreed with him and he was eating at the table, he leaned over, he had a mouthful of food, he spit his food in her face. He was always suppressing her and putting her down. And I saw the effects of that when I knew her. By that time, they were already divorced and had parted ways. But she had this personality where, if I would disagree with her, I'd say, well, I don't think we should sing that one. And she'd go, oh, I'm sorry. Where's that coming from? We're just disagreeing about something. You see what it did to her? But what did it do to his ministry? Here he had this big church. What happened to it? Yeah. You can't mock God. Okay, verse 8. Finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. And this is what I wanted to get to for today in the last 8 minutes. Verse 9. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. So what I wanted to talk about was the dynamics of communication in a relationship. So I may have shared this already. Back in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, when the divorce rate started to climb and eventually reach somewhere in the neighborhood of 50%, the church realized at that time that we can't just be marriage factories. Everybody that came to church before 1970, you went to the pastor, you got married. And what'd they do? They married you. That's just the way they did it, right? Your grandparents didn't go through any marriage counseling classes. They didn't back then. The church realized they had to do something. So they started coming up with programs to help people prepare for and understand marriage. And the assumption at that time was that why do things go wrong in a marriage? Well, because couples aren't communicating well. So you got to help them learn to communicate. Now we know that's just one small piece of it. There's many other things that go into it. But back then, that's what it is. So if you look at marriage programs or pre-marriage programs from the 60s or the 70s, they're almost all focused on communication. But having it be said that there's more to it than communication, I wanted to look at this issue of communication today a little bit. We're just not going to get a tenth of this done. Sorry about that. Some things that we need to know about communication. And this is helpful in all relationships. So not just in your marriage, but in all your relationships. If you understand these things, it will help you be a more effective communicator, which who needs that? We all can benefit from this, right? So one is understanding the role of nonverbal communication. So depending on what study you listen to, the numbers change, but the rough dynamics of this are always going to be the same. So the way I heard it is this way, that when you communicate to someone, the message that they are receiving from you, what they are hearing, is based 7% on what you're saying. Only 7% is the words that you actually say. 23% is based on voice inflection. That's true, don't you, right? That's what you're hearing, not what the person's saying, but their voice inflection. My dog knows this.
Yeah.
Oh, Molly, you're such a stupid animal. And she comes up to you. Right? They aren't listening to the words, it's the voice inflection. So being aware of this can help you in your communication with others to be thoughtful of voice inflection. But 70% is based on, guess what? Nonverbal body language, right? The person, before they're even hearing anything you're saying, they're reading what you're telling them with your body, right? Which is exactly right. So when you learn this, it helps you in your communication with each other. So, for example, like this, what is that communicating? Close, right? Or legs crossed. Now, it could just be meaning your leg is tired, you know, but that's what the person is reading. I remember visiting an important person a long time ago, and he sat behind a great big huge desk, the pastor. And when you came into the office, he had some chairs on the other side, and he sat behind this great big huge desk. What's that communicating?
Barrier.
Yeah, right. I am their Herr Pastor, and don't get in my space, and I will dictate to you, right? That's why, ever since I've learned that, in all my offices, I always put my desk against a wall or something. I never have the desk between me and the door, where the person walking in has that barrier. So you can use this in your marriage, right? To know that when you want to talk to your spouse and communicate to them, what are things you can do to communicate love, interest, openness, honoring or valuing of them, right? Well, here's a big one, leaning toward the person, right? When you want to show that the person is important to you, if I'm talking to Stan, I lean toward him. If I'm talking to Stan and I'm going like this, what's that saying? Right? So when you talk to your spouse, lean toward them a little bit. Having an open stance, having your legs open and your arms open, communicates openness and transparency with the person. For men, this is a big one, squaring up with your spouse. Women liked to talk with their shoulders squared. Watch two women talk. They'll look right at each other. Watch men talk. Just observe when two men are talking on the street or something like that. Men do not talk squared up with each other because that triggers our kind of old nature of conflict and challenge, right? You know, everything's a football game and a sport. If you square up with somebody, what do you do? Who do you square up with when you're a man? Someone you're mad at, right? You know, what did you do, Floyd? Are you kidding me? What? Right? You're mad. So men don't do that with other men. How do men talk to each other? Turns, slightly turned. Shoulder. Yeah, shoulders just slightly crooked, right? This is comfortable. I can talk to Floyd all day. If Floyd turns to me like this, I'm like, uh-oh, what did I do? Now what? Right? So that's normal for men. But this is how living with your wife according to understanding. Now you understand this. So men, husbands, when you talk to your wife, what's a good thing to do? Square up. Give them your full 100% attention. I've had a lot of women say that's why the best talks that they sometimes have with their husbands are just driving in the car because he's looking this way and you can talk, right? So when you really want to show your wife that you value her, give her your full nonverbal attention. Eyes lighting up when she talks, smiling, having a pleasant countenance on your face, having an open stance. Those are all things that communicate to her. Oh, we're down to 2 minutes. That's so much. Well, let's talk about this for a moment. Different levels of communication. And so when you're communicating with each other, what's the most basic level of communication? Facts. Just data. This is this is that. A deeper level, something that you would only share with someone that you trust enough to be able to talk this way with, is opinions. So if you're working with somebody at work and he asks you, how many widgets did they ship on the last thing, and you can tell him, that's just facts, right? But if he says, what do you think about the job that President Biden's doing? Now you got to stop and think for a second. Can I tell him what I really think? Because now it's an opinion. you have to be more cautious. But what's the deepest level of communication? Feelings. Yeah, you can call it emotion. Feelings. Your deepest feelings, that you only share with somebody that you can intimately and carefully trust. Women on the whole tend to be willing to share their feelings more readily. So men tend to keep, it's not that we don't have feelings, but men compartmentalize. Like we're like a ship, right? In the ship, when they would call general quarters, you know, we would set condition zebra. That means you're blocking all these watertight doors so that if there's a hole in the ship, only this part floods. It can't go into the other parts. You're compartmentalizing. Well, that's what men do in their hearts, right? We compartmentalize. So we have our feelings, but it's here. We don't let the feelings mix in with what we have to do at work or what's going on in the family or at church. So we have feelings. So to be able to share at the feeling level with our spouse, again, takes intentionality. I mentioned before, in your prayer life, it's one of the most powerful ways to show that you love your wife. If you are married, do you pray out loud with your wife? If not, I would strongly encourage you to do that. Let that become a normal part of your marriage, where you, as the spiritual leader, don't wait for her to say, hey, could we pray together? You, as the spiritual leader, find her, hold her hand, and say, could we pray? And then you don't wait for her to pray. Then you take the leadership, and you say, Lord, help me to love this woman. Show me what this woman needs most so that I can meet her need. And not only is God going to answer that prayer, but you know what's happening when you do that? Here's the thing. You can't lie to God. You can't pray and blow a lot of smoke at God, right? I'm going to fool God. Watch it. When you're praying that, you're opening your soul. You're being transparent. And your spouse is able to look into your heart. And you may have botched it that week. You may have been a terrible husband. You may have really blown it and done a lot of things wrong. But you know what she knows? He wants to be good to me. He wants to love me. He really does want to change. There's something in him that wants him to be this kind of husband that I've always wanted. And she'll be very forgiving and very helpful in moving you that way. So one of the strongest things you can do is in your marriage. It's not buy a fancy weekend cruise somewhere and that. Let's just start praying for her.